Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
The Watts Valley Wolf Ape. In this episode, we compile all our recent Linda Godfrey true werewolf cases into one episode. And we're going to start it all off with this all-new bit about the Fresno or Watts Valley Wolf Ape, taking as our inspiration the chapter devoted to this creature in Linda Godfrey's 2019 book, I Know What I Saw. Now, as far as the late great Linda Godfrey could tell from her research, it seems the legend of the Watts Valley Wolf Ape started in 2008, when someone reported running into a large wolf with a head like an ape or a baboon, and human-like hands and feet. I'm unclear why they thought it was a wolf and not a Sasquatch, but that was what was reported. Maybe he ran around on all fours. One detail the witness made a point to be clear about. The wolf ape appeared to be coughing and hacking. It seemed to be sick. That makes me wonder if this was its natural atmosphere, or if it wandered in from some other place with somewhat different air to breathe. Like any dogman worth his weight, the Watts Valley Wolf Ape likes to be in cemeteries. One anecdote that Godfrey relates has the monster chasing two men into the cemetery in Watts Valley. It seems the monster had them cornered, indicating that this is a particularly hostile kind of dogman or werewolf. I mean, after all, he wasn't just chasing one man. He was chasing two of them. The way the men said they got away was that they offered the dogman a pack of gum. Tossing the tiny silver-wrapped gum to the dogman to distract him, the two took off running out of the cemetery while the wolfman claimed his sweet prize. They do say it takes silver to best a werewolf, don't they? Some of the stories of the wolf ape get kind of crazy. Like in one, the creature invaded a schoolhouse in the country, and while the teacher hid in the closet, and the kids climbed on top of their desks, the wolf ape helped himself to everybody's lunch. Godfrey relates one story of a local minister who succeeded in felling one of the wolf apes. He was said to have nailed the carcass to the church wall and invited the public to come in and stare at what he called Satan's pet. She provides no date for this event and sadly no photos. Supposedly, the carcass was sold to a traveling carnival. If that story is really true, and isn't just a story, then maybe it will turn up someday in somebody's attic. The most recent sighting of the wolf ape that Godfrey writes about happened in the 1990s in Bass Lake in Madera County. That's about 45 miles to the northwest of Watts Valley. The creature was seen on all fours, drinking water from the edge of a lake. Who knows? Maybe the wolf ape still roams that region in California to this day. The description sounds a lot like the Googway, which are also said to have baboon-like faces. Maybe the Watts Valley wolf ape is the Googway's western cousin. The Wolf Woman of Alabama and the Dog Woman of Wernersville. I was recently unable to work for a week due to an accident my cat got into, as some of you know. It's a long story. We're hoping to get his stitches taken out in a couple of days. Anyway, when this happened, I had some credits left from Audible, and since I couldn't take my eyes off the cat for a second to make sure it didn't tear the stitches out, I got myself an audiobook copy of this Linda Godfrey book that I had never read before. I think it might be her final one, I'm not sure. It's from 2019. It's got some great werewolf and dog woman stories in it, and I'd like to share some of that with you tonight. This is all true as far as anyone knows. I will be using some actual photos of locations and mixing in some recreations I made myself. I'll try to be clear which is which, using titles at the bottom when it's a recreation or actual. If you find this episode interesting, we do have a link in the description to pick up a copy of the book so that you can read it for yourself. It's called I Know What I Saw, and it's by the late great Linda Godfrey, published in 2019. And if you use our link, the channel does make a small commission. Today we're going to take a trip back in history to a specific place in eastern Pennsylvania where multiple people claim to have had experiences with some kind of a creature or creatures that one might describe as dogman, or maybe as werewolves, or possibly as skinwalkers. Some of the stories in her book seem fairly straightforward, while others are harder to explain. This location is so spooky. It was rumored to be the site of a gruesome man's depraved, horrific taking of lives, but that was just a legend. However, then a real motorcycle gang actually ended the lives of 2 innocent people right nearby. You want to talk about cursed locations? I think you have to include the site of this demolished sanatorium in Wernersville, PA. In the early 1970s, dog woman rumors started in Wernersville. What is a dog woman? I'm not entirely sure, but people were scared. It was said that she lurked near South Mountain in the ruins of the Grandview Sanatorium. Now, to be clear, this was a sanatorium, not a sanitarium. It was opened in the mid-1800s, and it was a place for well-to-do city dwellers to pay to stay at so that they could breathe country air and drink water from a spring. The sanatorium went through several owners, but remained in operation as a resort for over 70 years, until 1927 when it was closed. Whoever still owned the land by the 60s had the buildings burned down deliberately in 1967, only 5 years prior to these rumors of a dog woman. There are remains of an elevator shaft and the front entrance of the place, plus this long stone wall with a door in it. Inside that stone door is a place the locals call the meat locker. The meat locker is a stone room with a large iron meat hook embedded in one of the walls. A legend grew that a serial killer had done in 5 people there and packed them into the area where the meat freezer used to be. In actuality, none of that seems to be true, but it was what initially caused teenage boys to bring girls there at night, hoping to scare them. However, once they did, they started encountering something else very strange. They started encountering something even stranger. In October 1972, a high school student named Terry Weinhold and 2 of his school buddies had been driving around the area after school multiple times, hoping to see the dog woman. They decided they'd have better luck if they came back after dark, so that's what they did. When they got to the wall on Grandview Road, they slowed down to look inside the meat locker. That was when they heard something that sounded like the combination of a roar and a growl. One of them called out when he saw a creature not inside the chamber, but up on top of the wall. It was screaming at them, but before they could react, the creature leaped off the wall and onto the road with them. They were facing off against some sort of werewolf-type entity, and the boys were very scared. They yelled at the driver, who Linda Godfrey calls A, to drive, and that is what A did. As they drove away, they could hear the large bipedal beast running after them on the road in the night. After they had gotten away, though, A decided he hadn't gotten a good enough look at the dogman or dog woman, so he turned his green Chevy truck around, and over the protestations of the other 2, he drove right back into the belly of the beast. They could actually hear the growling as they approached, and when one of them caught eyeshine, they got spooked and beat it out of there fast. They had one of those old-school flashlights that plugged into the cigarette lighter, and when he hit the gas, he lost control of the flashlight, which ended up banging against the outside of the cab while they sped out of that location. It seems there were a number of wild stories people in the region told in those days, but who knows which of them are true, if any. One person claims he entered the meat hook room and a hairy muscular arm, ending in claws, reached out of a hole in the wall and almost grabbed him. Pretty scary. But did it happen, or was it just a fishtail? The witness Terry Weinhold told Linda Godfrey that he had heard older people talking of the dog woman since he was a kid, and that sightings allegedly went back to the 1920s. Had the place really been being haunted by the dog woman since it was closed down? The Wolf Woman of Mobile, Alabama. Now, a half year earlier, in April of 1971, people had reported a wolf woman down in Mobile, Alabama. I believe we even had something about that on one of our previous episodes. While the dog woman of Wernersville was seen in the darkness and not clearly described, the wolf woman of Mobile, Alabama was seen at all times of the day and night over a week or two. This thing was described as attractive by witnesses, but it sounds like a nightmare to me. Imagine this: a beautiful woman with long hair, but her body is that of a wolf or a dog. One guy said it chased him home, but it didn't seem to have actually hurt anybody. I can't imagine wanting to see it coming around, though, to be honest. In the first week it was walking around the plateau area of Alabama, formerly known as Africa Town, over 50 people had called reports of it into the police. Linda Godfrey writes about it as though it were a benign presence, but people don't call the police about an animal unless they're scared. I know I'd be pretty creeped out. Is this the same creature that people were seeing up in Wernersville a half a year later? The strangest part of the Wernersville story is that it seems to have no beginning point. I mean, it starts with teenagers going to look for the dog woman because there had been a buzz about her. Well, what started the buzz? That's the part that's lost to history. What was the first sighting? Linda Godfrey wonders if the first sighting actually happened down in Alabama, and if that somehow the word of the dog woman from down there got mixed with the creepy meat hook room, and before you know it, you got yourself a local dog woman in Wernersville. But I'm not so sure about that. I think something which has been lost to time is what really started the Wernersville buzz about the dog woman. And maybe, just maybe, it was simply because people actually saw something weird there. What did they see? I don't know. But if they put out a time machine, I vow to try and find out. And if you would like to find out more about this subject, there is a sort of a time machine available for you. It's the book that inspired this episode, I Know What I Saw, by Linda Godfrey, and you can get your own copy from the link in the description. If you use that link, the channel makes a commission. If you like this episode, please thank Ace. We're only here because of his grace. Please join us in thanking Ace Williams 1978 for making this episode possible. Ace got to see yesterday's all-new Secret Members Only episode, and so can you. If you saw our last episode, you know that I recently got my digital hands on an audiobook version of Linda Godfrey's 2019 book, I Know What I Saw. It's got some great true stories of strange creatures, and tonight I'd like to sort of adapt her chapter on the witchy wolves of Omer, Michigan. If you find yourself wanting to read more about this, we'll have a link to pick up your own copy of the book in our description. Just so you know, the channel would make a small commission if you use that link, but I recommend this book to all cryptid fans no matter what means you use to get a hold of it. So what are witch wolves or witchy wolves? Well, it seems to sort of be another way to talk about werewolves, but these are not your typical werewolves, and the tradition of these particular werewolves or supernatural wolves in this area goes way back to the 1800s. In the book, Linda Godfrey goes to some pains to point out that in Europe, the idea of werewolves was inextricably linked to the idea of witchcraft. It was thought that some wolves are real, natural creatures, but others are in actuality witches or vampires able to present themselves as wolves. These were considered mainstream beliefs in Europe in those days. People were put to death for being a witch or a werewolf for around 300 years, ending about 1630. In the U.S., we revived the tradition in the later 1600s with the famous Salem witch trials, but the American version went heavier on the witches and a whole lot lighter on the werewolves. Still, the idea of supernatural wolves was in the minds of people who came from Europe to live here, and the concepts and traditions were passed down to each new generation. Officially, wolves were wiped out in this part of Michigan by 1935, yet to this day people still continue to report seeing these creatures, or being harassed by invisible versions of them, like werewolves mixed with the predator. Now, although she did speak firsthand with witnesses whenever possible, the majority of Godfrey's chapter on the witchy wolves is based on 2 anonymous articles clipped out of old newspapers and sent to Linda by fans of her writing. I'm unsure if she tells us the date of the first article, but it is detailing events that happened in the 1800s. Godfrey has succeeded in discovering that there were in fact people with these family names in the area in those days, but Linda was unable to confirm the actual details of these stories. However, as I said, she has established that these stories seem to be about real people who have actually existed in the area. So, during the American Civil War, Many prisoners died not of their wounds, but of malnutrition. There was a disease rampant back then, but hardly known at all today, that was known colloquially as scurvy. Scurvy was a horrible way to die, but it was easily preventable. You just needed to get some vitamin C in your diet from some source. Then the scurvy would go away. Sailors used to get scurvy too, until they began bringing large amounts of lemons and limes with them on their sea voyages. In fact, that's where the derogatory term for British people comes from, when people call them limeys. It's because the British sailors used to suck on limes, and therefore avoid getting scurvy. But the Confederate prison keepers did not care if their Union prisoners starved or how they passed away, and so Corwin Kearney, son of the Kearneys of Omer, Michigan, died in military prison in 1865 of scurvy and malnutrition. It took about 30 years for his remains to be shipped back to his family in Omer, with them finally arriving in a box about the size of a shoebox in 1895. The family placed the box in a normal-sized coffin and had it buried in a cemetery about 3 miles from Omer. Godfrey found Corwin Kearney's grave number listed in the historical record, so the story up to this point seems to be 100% true. Then things get crazy. On May the 1st of 1896, when a group of the town residents showed up at the cemetery with rakes and shovels and hoes to do their yearly spring cleanup of the place, they reached the grave of their Civil War hero. However, they discovered that it had been dug up and was in the process of being used as a birthing den by what they described as a very large she-wolf. Feeling threatened, the huge female creature leaped out of the grave and created such noise that from out of the woods surrounding the cemetery emerged other, even larger, male wolves. The men used their garden equipment to fend off attack from the monster wolves as they beat it out of there, happy to escape with their lives. After some time had passed, the town reassembled with a group of armed men and returned to the grave, finding it had been abandoned by the wolves. It seems a certain local resident named Mrs. Gorey, who does seem to have been an actual historical person, allegedly told the others of a legend from her native Tennessee. It seems that rumors went around during the Civil War that the remains of Northern soldiers were having a witch curse placed upon them before being returned to their families. She pointed out the label Scorbutus that had been placed on Corwin Kearney's box of remains, and declared that it was the curse of Scorbutus which had caused the werewolf and her cubs to materialize in the grave. Now it turns out that Scorbutus is actually the scientific name for scurvy, which is what Kearney died of. But that didn't matter to the townsfolk. So as I said, the villagers armed themselves and returned to the grave. Local undertaker Fred Mercer, who was an actual real person from history, was brought out to examine the bones in the shoebox-sized container that had been shipped back to Omer. Now, according to this anonymous article, Undertaker Mercer said he felt those were not human bones at all, but in fact were the bones of a witchy wolf, a supernatural wolf. Well, that was all the proof the town needed. Reverend Key from the Omer Presbyterian Church was brought over to the grave. He is said to have read hours of prayers related to exorcism until Mercer the Undertaker declared that the spirit of the witchy wolf had moved on. The coffin was reburied, and the town went home, hoping this was all over. Well, it might have been for their generation, but the story of the witchy wolves would only get wilder as the town moved into the future. Godfrey was sent another old newspaper clipping with the original source not indicated on it. This one seems to have come from the 1970s, judging by the update at the very end. But the majority of this story is said to have happened in the 1920s. The article is entitled, "The Legend of the Witchy Wolves. Omer, Michigan's search continues for missing boys." The article is credited to an obvious fake name, Uncle Moss E. Logs. At any rate, according to the clipping, on September 2nd, 1925, 17-year-old Clive Robinson Jr. and 16-year-old Stuart McClavey went missing and were never found. The story that their girlfriends Lottie Pestru and Betty Will told is pretty insane, and it involves the witchy wolves. Godfrey was able to confirm that there were families named McClavey and Pestru in the area back in those days, but nothing more than that. So the two teenage couples went for a ride down forested Tyler Plains Road so they could do a little stargazing and have some privacy. They started hearing the sound of a crying cat. They found it quite distracting. Then an old woman with a hooded robe came out of the woods and asked the boys if they could please rescue her pet cat, who was stuck in a tree. Both boys got out of the car to help, when suddenly there was a horrible shouting sound from the woods. The old lady's hood pulled back to reveal that she had the head of a dog or a wolf. Out of the forest from several directions emerged huge, feral monster wolves, who leaped upon the boys and began doing them in. Betty said Lottie threw up, as Betty realized she had wet her bloomers. The two drove back to town in a panic and returned with over a dozen men. Neither boy was anywhere to be seen, so the next morning, a posse of 300 men was gathered to search the forest. All they found was some bloody dirt, some scraps of clothing, and some bone fragments that might or might not have been related to the incident. 4 days later, a local tracker named S. Mayhew was brought in, and he found large wolf tracks leading down to the swamp. Mayhew sent 9 of his hunting dogs down into that swamp, and only 3 returned. Mayhew called off his search at that point, refusing to go any further. He had found his match, and it was the witchy wolves of Ulmer. At the end of this article sent in to Godfrey is an update dated November 13th, 1975. 2 deer hunters named W. Thick and H. Miggett found a belt buckle partially buried in the clearing where the boys were supposed to have been attacked. It had the initials SM on it, and the hunters assumed this must have stood for Stuart McClavey, one of the 2 victims of the witch wolves. They gave the buckle to Mike McClavey, Stuart's nephew. So, being a journalist in the old-school original sense of the term, Linda Godfrey decided to take the dates mentioned in these 2 articles and go search the records of the local newspaper for the Ulmer area. As it turns out, the local paper is not available on microfiche, and in fact, the original paper record was destroyed in a fire years back. That means these stories may never be able to be confirmed. Too much time has passed and the newspapers were not preserved. But on the other hand, this also means they can likely never be debunked either. Godfrey discovered that a writer named David Kolchak had written a piece for Fate magazine number 15 about this very subject. He grew up about 20 miles south of Ulmer Plains, and he used to go there with his friends at night to get scared. He said they would hear the strangest sounds emanating from those woods, something midway between howling and laughing. The legend he had grown up with was a bit different. This version of the witchy wolves claims they are from the Chippewa culture, and that they are invisible like Predator from those movies. Kolchak admitted that none of his friends ever had the nerve to step out of the car in that area. And that was because they had heard stories from friends who said that something invisible came right up to them and knocked them back on their butts. Look, I don't know what's going on over there in Ulmer, Michigan and Ulmer Plains. It doesn't seem like something I would want to mess with. If you're thinking about investigating that place, maybe you shouldn't. Or if you do, make sure you pay up your life insurance premium first, so that your family's taken care of afterward. That's my advice for anyone thinking of messing with the witchy wolves of Ulmer. Linda Godfrey's got even more on this subject as well as other cryptids in her fantastic 2019 book, I Know What I Saw, which you can snag a copy of from the link in the description. If you use that link, this channel makes a bit of a small commission. And now here's Bigfoot with today's executive producer credit. Biggie. He's as cool as he can be. He's tonight's executive producer named Esteban P. Please join me in thanking Esteban P, who just recently rejoined our channel memberships. That means he got to see our new members-only story from a couple days ago, and he's going to get to see the 2 new members-only stories coming out this weekend. Places to find a werewolf. Today we have the 3rd part of our trilogy of episodes inspired by the late great Linda Godfrey's 2019 book, I Know What I Saw, which we have a link to buy in the description. Just so you know, if you use that link, this channel makes a small commission. In tonight's show, we focus on Godfrey's chapter entitled, Where to Find the Werewolf. Now in the book, she skips right over Bray Road, but we'll drop in there to start things off. This is the place in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, where people saw a strange creature eating roadkill at night, back in the 1990s. This is what turned Linda Godfrey from a little-known local newspaper columnist in Wisconsin into a national figure. Maybe she skips over Bray Road in this book because she's afraid of overkill, or maybe it's just because she had admitted to wondering if those sightings might have actually been of a bear with mange. Be that as it may, there were a large number of other cases brought to Godfrey by the public, and she seemed convinced that these were real phenomena, whatever the phenomena actually was. Now you can go to Bray Road and wait around for a dogman to show up, but Linda points out that almost nobody intending to see a dogman has ever actually seen one. It's something that tends to happen when you're intending to do something else. Interestingly, she tells us that people looking to hunt for ghosts or other legendary scary stuff sometimes run into the dogman instead. Take, for instance, then teenager John Lyons and his friends on a gravel road outside Reed City, Michigan, in June 2005. The reason they had gathered at this creepy location was to go inside an old abandoned shack that had once been a schoolhouse in the woods. There were stories about this shack. People said that they could hear the sound of children inside there at night. Sometimes they were laughing. Other times they were crying. The owner of the shack admitted to Linda Godfrey that he had heard the creepy sounds himself. At any rate, Lyons and his buddies did not see or hear ghost children on that night. Instead, they encountered a large gray dogman. Going back a second time, they got menaced and bothered by a smaller black-furred dogman who was still large enough to scare them all off. Godfrey joined Lyons and his friends on a return trip to the location in 2006, and she brought along with her a cameraman from the TV show Monster Quest. While it was not caught on camera, Godfrey says she saw the large gray one for a brief moment. It was facing away from her, only about 30-40 feet away, and she said she saw its spine. It then moved out of the light, as she called to the cameraman to shoot where she was pointing. That was the only time Linda Godfrey ever saw a dogman in real life, and it was in those spooky woods, outside Reed City, Michigan. There are some habitats where she says it seems you might have a better chance of seeing a dogman. Those include graveyards, deserted buildings, campgrounds, and military bases. Seminary Woods is a little bit of forest located just a wee bit south of Milwaukee. It's hardly wilderness located in the city of St. Francis. There is an old cemetery in those woods, and people have seen the dogman there, or something looked just like it. One witness wrote to Godfrey about his dogman sighting, telling her he had gone to the location because of the rumor that it's haunted by a black-robed monk. There had been no stories that he had heard about dogmen or werewolves in that area prior to his own experience. This happened in June 2005 at around 10 or 11 at night, when the witness entered the old cemetery with his friends. The small group became aware they were being watched by a creature over 6 feet tall, standing only about 50 feet away. It had the head of a wolf, and it was entirely covered in black fur. The group ran back the way they had come, hearing the beast following on their heels. As they got out of that forest, they said the creature let them go, emitting a howl that was, they said, half pain and half anger. Sometimes, as mentioned earlier, the best way to find a dogman is to look for ghosts. In Oak Creek, Wisconsin in 2007, 4 young people were on East Fitzsimmons Road which was known locally as a haunted lover's lane. It's a road that becomes more of a dead-end trail, and it leads to a bluff dropping straight down to the beach far below. The 4 teenagers were there hoping to see a ghost, when a werewolf-type creature leaped out at them instead, chasing them back to civilization. Godfrey got out to the location within days and did find large dog tracks around the cornfield that the monster is said to have risen out of. In fact, even Bray Road has a number of haunted houses on it, so there does seem to be some kind of connection between hairy canine cryptids and haunted locations. Godfrey says she spent a night once in a haunted house on Bray Road. She did not have any paranormal experiences there herself, but she was told plenty of scary stories by those who had. The haunted New Hampshire cemetery. A man wrote to Linda Godfrey saying that in mid-October 2014, he came home around 12:30 a.m. and saw outside his house what he at first thought was a deer. It was across the street from his home, walking through the first layer of trees in the forest. It was very thin, but he realized it was not a deer, because it was walking on its hind legs. He said it appeared to have come from the local graveyard, and was moving quickly through the edge of the woods, making little poodle steps. It was soon out of sight, heading toward an area that had a number of houses in it. The witness felt it might be looking for a shed to sleep in near the church. I don't know. What if it was like that old Stephen King movie, and it was actually the preacher of the church instead? Oops, I guess that was a spoiler. German military werewolves. Godfrey is from a similar background to myself, as she comes from a German Lutheran family. This German connection seems to have brought stories to her from that country, which has a lot of werewolf sightings, to be honest. Godfrey speculates that these monsters might be the descendants of experiments by the famous Mustache Man from World War II. She thinks he might have been experimenting to create werewolf super soldiers. But this just seems to be a wild guess on her part, as she doesn't really back it up with any evidence. She does tell us some creepy stories, though, such as the following one. This is the story of what is known as the Moorbach werewolf. At the Hahn Air Base in Germany in 1988, the legend of the Moorbach werewolf was well known to the servicemen, but few of them took it seriously. One night, a patrol group came upon some strangely mutated deer carcasses, and then they heard a loud, fierce howling. Another unit called in saying they were pursuing a large dark canine that was headed for the command center. The sergeant reported that he saw a large dark dogman clear a 9-foot fence before turning to gloat that he had escaped his pursuers before disappearing into the night. The Massacre Burial Grounds. There is an area near the Manistee National Forest in which there was once a massacre of the Potawatomi tribe by an invading force of the Iroquois people back in the 1600s. Men, women, and children were hastily buried all over the forest, and many feel that this is what makes the place so incredibly haunted to this day. There is a witness we will refer to as Brad, who claimed to Godfrey to have had 3 separate Dogman experiences in this exact location, where he was living with his dad back in 2016. All 3 of his sightings happened that year, and I'm going to tell you about each of them in the order they happened. Now, all of these sightings were made on the 30 miles of farm, woods, and creeks that his family owns. February 8th, 2016 at 3:52 a.m. Brad got up at 3 a.m. in a raging snowstorm to clear the driveway so that the propane delivery scheduled for later that morning could happen. He heard a splash from the nearby creek and stopped what he was doing to see what was moving about over there. He was expecting to see a deer, but that is not what made the noise. In the darkness of the woods next to a huge oak tree, Brad could make out yellowish eyeshine, standing what appeared to be 7 feet up off the ground. Well, as frightened as Brad was to see this, apparently the creature he was seeing was just as scared. It took off with a superhuman rush of speed toward the west, and then it leaped up into the air, scrambling to the very top of a tall tree in seconds. The witness then describes the sound of treetops clanging against each other. That was the word he used, clanging. And it seems that the creature was using his weight and momentum to ride one swaying tree until he could leap to the next, and then the next, and then the next. It was sort of a reverse Tarzan or reverse Spider-Man kind of an escape. I've never heard of such a thing before in terms of Dogman. And in fact, even Linda Godfrey wondered if Brad might have seen a Bigfoot in this particular instance. Brad's second Dogman sighting of 2016. March 24th, 2016 at about 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon, Brad walked along the creek and found it weirdly silent. He didn't even hear any birds. As Brad rounded a curve, he saw about 50-60 feet in front of him what he at first took to be a black bear, messing with something on the ground on the side of the creek. By accident, Brad broke a twig loudly, and that black-furred creature stopped what it was doing and stood up on its hind legs to look in Brad's direction. When it did so, Brad no longer thought he was looking at a bear. It appeared now more like a black werewolf or a dogman, standing up on its hind legs and looking behind itself in his direction. It didn't seem to be able to see Brad, who was hiding from it, and so the creature lifted its nose in the air and began sniffing the wind to see who was there. At some point it did notice Brad, who grabbed his weapon but was too afraid to make a move in any direction. The beast snarled at Brad and his life flashed in front of his eyes. But then it made a leap of about 25 feet and raced off toward the trees, where Brad imagines it rode away on the treetops like that previous one he had seen. To be clear, the first one was gray, and the second one had black fur. Shaken up by the situation, Brad decided to confide in his father. Well, Dad told him he was crazy, and told him to stop speaking nonsense. So Brad stopped talking to his father about any of this. Brad's third Dogman sighting of 2016. May 29, 2016 at a little before 9 p.m., Brad and his father were having a fire down by the creek. His dad asked him to go get some more wood from back behind the pole barn, and Brad was less than enthused about the idea of it. Still, he walked off into the dark area, where he suspected he might run into one of those dog-headed creatures that his father didn't believe in. The area where the wood was stacked was silent. Like no crickets, no frogs, no owls, no nothing. Brad lit up a cigarette to calm his nerves when he heard a sound that sounded to him like someone zipping up a zipper. Peering out into the night, Brad thought he saw something moving. Just then, a horrible stench hit him. It smelled like every disgusting thing you ever smelled all mixed together. Brad figured out something must have died over there, and so he shone his flashlight around, tried to locate the source of the odor. That was when he heard a deep guttural growl. He shone his light in the direction of that growl, and he saw red glowing eyes reflecting back over 5 feet up off the ground. Once the eye shine caught his attention, Brad said he could make out that the creature's front paws looked a lot like hands. The creature then reared back and seemed almost double in height, standing now on its hind legs, probably over 8 feet tall. It growled again, and then took off to the south. Feeling a bit in a state of shock, Brad wandered back to the fire where his dad asked him where the firewood was. Realizing he better not tell his dad the truth, Brad just said he felt sick and went home to bed. The Cave Werewolf of Hagerstown. In Hagerstown, Maryland, there is a mountain known locally as Red Hill because the clay is red. Linda Godfrey received a letter from someone claiming that his dad's generation used to always see a werewolf up on this mountain. Eventually, his dad and his dad's friends decided to go look for this werewolf so they could see what it was up close. While they were investigating Red Hill, they discovered caves. So they went and got themselves some ropes and some weapons and some flashlights, and they returned to investigate this cave system that they had discovered. In some areas, they had to squeeze through narrow passages, and in other places they needed to climb up to ledges. They discovered ancient Native American cave paintings, proving that they were far from the first people to be inside those caves. The group was proceeding deeper and deeper into the cave, when suddenly, something reached out from the darkness and grabbed one of the men by his wrist. Somehow he managed to break free of the monster's grip, and the men began their long, slow escape from this underground hellscape, knowing that the creature they went in there to hunt was now at their back hunting them. Godfrey goes on from there, but if you want to hear more, I suggest you use the link in this video's description to pick up your own copy of this book called I Know What I Saw by Linda Godfrey. If you use our link, this channel makes a small commission. But the main point in all of this seems to me to be this. You can't really plan to see a dogman. Or maybe you can if you intend to see ghosts. The only person in any of these stories who set out trying to see a dogman and then did is Godfrey herself, in that old episode of Monster Quest. Sadly, it was not captured on camera, but I do remember the moment of her pointing and saying she could see it on that old episode. If I were you, I would not seek out a dogman experience of my own. It's the kind of thing that happens to you when you least expect it anyway. But if you do go out there looking for a man-eating monster, at least go in large numbers. At least go out there with some protection. Because when you go out into dark, lonely, creepy locations, you never know when you're going to run into the dogman. After all, you can't afford the rent in the city anymore. Whether you're a sir or whether you're a madam, you'll not find a cooler executive producer than our Mr. Adam. Please join me in thanking Adam Friday for making this episode possible. Adam got to see this week's new secret members-only story, and he's going to get to see both the new scary members-only stories this weekend. If you'd like to see them too, then listen to what this next little guy has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.